fuck. No problem.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
If you want to really understand what's going on in the world, you need to follow the money.
In People and Profit, we tackle the biggest stories in the global economy and break down why they matter to you.
From mega mergers to market crashes and those new business ideas that just could change the world.
In this economy, it's the show you can't afford to miss.
Join us every week for your essential business briefing.
People and Profit on France 24 and France24.com.
Ukrainian and Russian delegations heading to Turkey for a fresh round of in-person peace talks. Kyiv, for its part, says it's ready to discuss Ukraine adopting a neutral status. A historic summit in Israel brings together its top diplomat with counterparts from several Arab states, along with the U.S. Topping the agenda, security concerns centering on Iran. And the Oscars creating quite the buzz after Will Smith smacked Chris Rock in the face over a joke made about his wife. More on that and other notable moments of the night coming up in the program. You're watching France 24. Thanks for joining us here in the newsroom. I'm Claire Rush. A new round of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia is expected to get underway tomorrow in Turkey. Delegations are arriving in the country today, according to the Kremlin. Well, Turkey hosted the previous round of high-level in-person talks more than 2 weeks ago. Negotiators have held regular talks via video conference, but there have been no breakthroughs so far, with both sides describing efforts as difficult. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he is ready to discuss Ukraine adopting neutrality, but he's also insisted the country's sovereignty is a red line. Sinead McCausland tells us more.
As Russia's invasion of Ukraine grinds on,
President Volodymyr Zelensky continues to rally support for his beleaguered country, speaking with 4 prominent Russian journalists on Sunday in a 90-minute video call, in which Zelensky said he's ready to consider a key Russian demand.
Гарантии безопасности и нейтралитет, безъядерный статус нашего государства, мы готовы на него идти. Это самый главный пункт. Это был первый принципиальный пункт для Российской Федерации, насколько я помню. И насколько мне помнится, что они из-за этого начали войну.
Adopting a neutral status would mean abandoning Ukraine's ambition to one day join the NATO military alliance. Other neutral countries like Sweden and Finland have been proposed as models. Zelensky says such a status would need to be put to a referendum. He also demanded that Russian troops withdraw to their pre-invasion positions before discussing the status of the eastern Donbass region, where pro-Russia separatists have been fighting a war of secession since 2014.
Я понимаю, что освободить полностью территорию, заставить Россию невозможно. Это приведет к Третьей мировой войне. Я прекрасно все понимаю и отдаю себе отчет. Поэтому я и говорю, это компромисс, да, компромисс. Вернитесь туда, с чего все началось, и там попытаемся решить вопрос Донбасса. Сложный вопрос Донбасса.
Despite the willingness to compromise, Zelensky refuses to engage with Moscow's other demands, including the demilitarization of Ukraine. The next round of peace talks are set to take place this week in Turkey. Expectations are low, as Ukraine's military intelligence service says Moscow's ultimate goal is a partition of the country.
Since their invasion began, Russian troops have faced stiff resistance from Ukrainian forces, including from the Aerorozvidka. France 24's Gwendolyn Dubono met one of the leaders of this elite drone pilot unit, a rare interview translated into English by Charles Pellegrin.
They're the eyes of Ukrainian soldiers on the battleground. This man is one of the commanders of a squadron of drone pilots. They operate reconnaissance drones as well as combat ones.
We work night and day. We observe them. We determine their exact location, fly, and then strike.
Sometimes they hear us because some drones have a recognizable sound. When they hear that sound, then we can see them running away in a panic, lying down, hiding, but not all of them make it.
His unit is now able to make its own attack drones, like this one. He says Russian troops have since adapted.
Our main challenge is the lack of equipment. We have to hand it to our enemy. They work very hard, and they're very good at counter-operations, at electronic warfare. So almost every day we lose equipment. That's why we keep asking for support. We need it, and we see new equipment come from the world over.
The daily flights over the capital confirm that Russian forces have been struggling in this region.
We can see what's happening around Kiev as well. They're protecting themselves, and we can see that it's beginning to look bad for some of them. Sometimes they're cut off from their supply lines, their ammunition, food, and fuel. It's demoralizing them, and we can see it.
The situation on the Eastern Front is very different. His unit conducts hundreds of missions there every day, and they're aware they're in it for the long haul.
Well, the humanitarian crisis on the ground also intensifying. More than 3.8 million Ukrainians have now fled the country, according to the UN. Some 90% of them women and children, and more than half arriving in Poland. Refugees continue to arrive in the neighboring country in large numbers, although single-day border crossings do appear to have slowed from a peak earlier in the month. The UN estimates that another 6.5 million people have been internally displaced inside Ukraine. One of Russia's top independent newspapers, Novaya Gazeta, has suspended publication until the end of what Moscow calls its special operation in Ukraine. Earlier on Monday, the outlet learned of another formal warning from Russia's state communications watchdog, its second since last week, prompting it to pause operations. while its chief editor, Dmitry Muratov, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year, said it was a difficult decision. The move also comes on the heels of a recently passed law in Russia threatening up to 15 years in jail for spreading fake news about Russia's military operations. Moving on, Russia's economy is feeling the effect of sanctions. Scores of Western brands have pulled out of the Russian market, and the fall of the ruble has sent inflation spiraling upwards. But in spite of this, popular support for Vladimir Putin appears to remain stable. Our team in Moscow reports.
Alexander, a Muscovite pensioner, gets his groceries at ever higher prices.
What really astonished me was the price of these peppers, 277 rubles a kilo, for vegetables.
Since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's currency has collapsed and inflation is rising. Like all Russians, Alexander is having to adapt.
Fruit juice, for example. I can't buy the one I want. I have to buy things that are on special.
To help him relativize these problems, Alexander can count on Russian TV.
You see, there are shortages all over the world. It's not just here that prices are rising.
Sometimes he has the feeling the TV doesn't say the whole truth.
I suppose that it's probably true, because it seems plausible, highly plausible, but at the same time, not at all. Really not at all. But we can't rule it out either. So even if you think maybe it's not, it's probably true.
Some propaganda messages leave Alexander with serious doubts, though.
В руки наших военных попали документы, которые подтверждают, Киев готовился к агрессии против России.
An attack from Ukraine against Crimea? I doubt it. They know that would have meant open war with Russia.
Nevertheless, Alexander supports his country and his president.
Blaming Putin for all ills is like blaming Stalin. It's the course of politics and history that forced them to take certain decisions. They had no choice. You have to understand me. I'm Russian, and I can't very well see how I could not support my country. I can criticize it or not like it. But in a situation like this, I must support it. It's like a wife. A good wife may think her husband is right or not, but in any case, she has to stand by him and reload his ammunition.
Alexander has a character trait that's vital for Russians today more than ever: resignation.
Moving on to another one of our top stories at this hour, the top diplomats of Israel, the U.S., and 4 Arab states held a landmark meeting today, this Monday. The talks brought together for the first time on Israeli soil the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. Egypt's top diplomat was also present. Well, concluding the summit, Israel said it would be held again in the future as it looks to boost ties with Arab states in a bid to deter Iran, its biggest rival in the region. Regional concerns about the ongoing negotiations to revive the Iran nuclear deal had been high on the meeting's agenda.
Finally, as neighbors, and in the case of the United States, as friends, we will also work together to confront common security challenges and threats, including those from Iran and its proxies.
This new architecture, the shared capabilities we are building, intimidates and deters our common enemies, first and foremost, Iran and its proxies. They certainly have something to fear. What will stop them is not hesitation or being conciliatory, but rather determination and strength.
Israel correspondent Iris Mackler covered the summit for us. I asked her earlier if any major announcements came out of it.
I don't know that there were really any major announcements other than that this summit, there is a plan to hold it annually, to upgrade it to a commercial and security forum that will take place for these participants and any other participants across the region. And I think that is significant. It's also being seen as a display of unity in the face of Iran, certainly, but a show of strength from, I guess it's a sign of how much of the Abraham Accords always was that the anti-Iranian stance was always a motive there. I think another thing that was quite interesting was how amazed all the participants were, each one in his speech, that they were there in Israel having this meeting together. I think Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, actually said the impossible has become possible, which lets you know nothing is impossible. So I think there is definitely a feeling that they were participating at something historic, and whatever security decisions they came to, we didn't hear about them.
And Iris, absent from this summit were the Palestinians. How has Palestinian leadership been reacting to this meeting?
That's right. It's quite interesting. We did hear from one Palestinian official. They described it as the Nakba Forum, the Catastrophe Forum. I don't think that the Palestinian leadership really has known how to handle this from the start. They definitely feel abandoned. Israel's foreign minister said he would invite the Palestinians to come if it became an annual forum. It would be very interesting to see if they did agree to go. We did see the King of Jordan arriving in Ramallah, a rare visit. He arrived by helicopter at the Muqata, is currently meeting, in fact, with the Palestinian president. But all eyes were on this forum, I think, including there, although he is there to try to defuse tensions ahead of Ramadan, which is starting this week.
France 24's Iris Mackler reporting earlier from Jerusalem. And finally, this year's Oscars likely to go down in history as the one where Will Smith smacked Chris Rock in the face over a joke the comedian made about his wife. But the Film Awards ceremony also featured other notable firsts. Catherine Viette tells us more.
Oh, wow!
It was the smack heard around the world after a joke went wrong at the Oscars. Chris Rock's comments on Jada Pinkett Smith's hairdo did not sit well with her husband, Will Smith. After the onstage slap, Smith shouted profanities at the comedian.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth!
Shortly after the incident, Smith won the Best Actor Oscar for King Richard, where he played the father of tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams. In his tearful and rambling acceptance speech, Smith compared himself to Williams.
I want to apologize to the Academy. I want to apologize to all my fellow nominees. Art imitates life. I look like the crazy father, just like they said. I look like crazy father, just like they said about Richard Williams.
Smith's viral moment overshadowing the rest of the evening, even as history was being made in the Best Picture category. Apple TV film Coda won the coveted top honor, a first for a streaming service. The title stands for Child of Deaf Adult and stars deaf actors in lead roles. Actor Troy Kotsur, who plays the deaf father of a girl who can hear and wants to pursue a music career, won Best Supporting Actor, another first.
This is amazing to be here on this journey. I cannot believe I'm here. Thank you so much to all the members of the Academy for recognizing my work.
The film also won Best Adapted Screenplay. Jane Campion took home the Best Director Oscar for Power of the Dog, while Jessica Chastain turned her role as Tammy Faye Baker from The Eyes of Tammy Faye into Best Actress Gold. Wrapping up the acting categories, Ariana DeBose, following in the footsteps of Rita Moreno, also won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her portrayal of Anita in West Side Story.
Well, that's all from me for now, but stay with us here on France 24. More world news coming up for you shortly.
And the Oscar goes to...
Hello
and welcome to our special film show dedicated to the 94th Academy Awards. Best Picture went to feel-good feature Coda, a remake of a French film about a hearing child in a deaf family. The ceremony returned with full force to LA's Dolby Theatre. The Academy was looking for excitement to boost the show's increasingly dismal ratings. They ended up getting more drama than they bargained for. To talk about this year's winners, I'm joined by film critic Ben Kroll. Now, Ben, usually we'd start by talking about the winner for Best Picture, but this year's ceremony, it has to be said, was overshadowed by a rather violent incident involving Best Actor winner Will Smith. Ben, what happened there?
Oh my God, what a night. Well, let's just call him, let's just say what as we see it. Chris Rock was, presenting an award, doing a little routine, making little jokes here, make a little joke here, doing a little roast there, and he caught Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife and partner of over 20 years, in his crosshair. He made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's alopecia, of course, and Will did not have any of it. He walked on stage and violently slapped Chris Rock in the face, and people in the auditorium thought it was a bit. People watching at home might have thought it was a bit. That uncertainty was very quickly resolved when Will Smith continued to harangue and verbally attack Chris Rock from his own seat using language so salty that we cannot repeat it on air. And that was pretty much proof that this was not a scripted routine. This was a quite emotional and violent outburst by Will Smith to what he perceived as an affront to his wife, Jada Pinkett.
Yeah, a bad reaction to what was a bad joke. Will Smith did apologize, though, in his acceptance speech. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I want to apologize to the Academy. I want to apologize to all my fellow nominees. Art imitates life. I look like the crazy father, just like they said. I look like crazy father, just like they said about Richard Williams.
I think it's very telling that both Best Actor Will Smith and Best Actress Jessica Chastain won for biopics. Of course, Will Smith played Richard Williams in King Richard. Jessica Chastain played Tammy Faye Baker in The Eyes of Tammy Faye. But absolutely nobody is really talking about those films. Even though the films are about well-known, mediatized figures, their stars, their celebrities outshine the films, outshine the performances themselves. And that really felt like a key tenor of the night, which was less about the films and more about the stars.
And Ben, let's talk about one film that did get recognized. That's CODA, which stands for Child of a Deaf Adult. It marked the first Best Picture win for a film that was actually released by a streaming service.
And not the streaming service that everyone expected. For the past 4 or 5 years, Netflix has been a pretty big player in the Oscars, and everyone was expecting them to make their big showing this year with their first ever Best Picture win. In fact, the first ever Best Picture to go to a streaming service went to Apple TV, who bought the film CODA after it won every single award at the Sundance Film Festival in January of 2021. And it's quite a success story for a small film, a remake of a French title that would go on to make a kind of history as the first streaming film to win the Oscar, and paving the way, I think, for many, many more to come.
Yeah, CODA also won for Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Supporting Actor for Troy Kotsur. Now, that's only the second time a deaf actor has ever won an Oscar. His CODA co-star, Marlee Matlin, won an award back in 1987. Kotsur dedicated his Oscar to the deaf and disabled communities. Let's hear from him and see a clip of CODA.
This is amazing to be here on this journey. I cannot believe I'm here. Thank you so much to all the members of the Academy for recognizing my work.
I want to do this.
There are plenty of pretty voices with nothing to say. Do you have something to say?
The Academy uses a ranked voting system, which means that they're not looking to give the Best Picture to the film that gets the most #1 votes, but for the film that gets the most votes overall within the top 3, which produces consensus winners like CODA, films that generally everybody has a good feeling about, but maybe doesn't inspire the same passion and the same fervor that can also be divisive in other camps.
Yeah, that ranked voting system might be the reason that the more divisive Power of the Dog didn't win, as some were expecting that it might. Director Jane Campion, though, did win for Best Director. That's the second time in a row that that award has gone to a woman.
Yes, it is. And it's also the second time that Jane Campion had been nominated for Best Director. And in a really wonderful bit of symmetry, she'd been nominated for the first time in 1993, and she lost to a guy that nobody ever talks about anymore named Steven Spielberg. Is that your name? Okay. Oh, yeah. And last night, Steven Spielberg sat in the aisle and watched himself and lost to Jane Campion. So in a really nice, turnaround of events. Spielberg took the Oscar from Jane Campion in 1993. Jane Campion took the Oscar from Spielberg in 2022.
Yeah, I love those moments of Oscar symmetry. And there was another one that was really great last night, and it also had to do with Steven Spielberg.
Well, Spielberg had released his remake of West Side Story exactly 60 years since the first original film came out, and that means that when Ariana DeBose won for Best Supporting Actress, she won the same award that Rita Moreno won 60 years prior. And in probably the most moving and to my eyes anyway, emotional moment of the night, Rita Moreno sat in the audience with tears in her eyes, beaming with pride as she saw Ariana DeBose make history of her own as the first openly queer Latina woman to win Best Supporting Actress.
Yeah, and Ariana DeBose mentioned her identity in her acceptance speech, saying that her award showed that there is a place for us.
You know what, now you see why that Anita says, I want to be in America, because even in this weary world that we live in, dreams do come true. Imagine this little girl in the back seat of a white Ford Focus. Look into her eyes. You see a queer, openly queer woman of color, an Afro-Latina, who found her strength in life through art. And that's what I believe we're here to celebrate.
Now, Ben, if we judge solely based on number of awards, then Dune was the biggest winner of the night, even if we didn't actually see them receiving all of their prizes on screen.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it from watching the ceremony, because they actually cut about 6 or 7 awards out of the televised ceremony, awarding them at an earlier ceremony, at an earlier part of the ceremony that was not televised. And that really took a real hit out of Dune, which was, not for nothing, the biggest commercial success of all of the 10 films nominated for Best Picture, and the one that the most amount of people probably saw in a theater.
Yeah, I saw it in theaters.
Yeah, it's a big event. People went to go see it. It was a huge movie. And there was something about last night's ceremony that took the movies out of the Oscars. Dune was the biggest movie, it was the biggest event, and somehow it also made the least impression despite winning the most amount of awards.
All right, well, for anyone who missed that movie event, let's take a quick look at Dune.
Fear is the mind killer.
My Lord Duke.
Where the fear is gone, only I will remain.
Go, go, go!
Now, Ben, contrary to what some people were pushing for, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky did not make a video appearance at the ceremony.
For the better.
The situation in Ukraine did get mentioned, though.
Yeah, and I don't think the situation was far from anyone's minds at all. I mean, there was many lapels, there were many oblique references to it. And when the actress, the Ukrainian-born actress and activist Mila Kunis came out to present a musical performance, she made some vague references. She talked about the resilience of the human spirit without putting too many precise words on it. The only time that was really addressed in a direct way was for a moment of silence that in typical Academy Awards fashion was more like 15 seconds, and that led into a bunch of commercials afterwards.
Typical Oscars fashion, I suppose.
Commerce before art and commerce before, fine thought sometimes.
Ben, there is one film that we haven't mentioned yet, and you said that it actually was your favorite of the awards.
Yeah, I'm really happy that Drive My Car won for Best International Feature, and for the only reason that there was no real narrative around Drive My Car. There's nothing historic about a Japanese film winning Best International Feature. In fact, it's the 13th Japanese film to win. There was nothing trailblazing about it. It was just a good story, well told, that everyone who saw it really came to love it. And I think that was one of the true success stories of this Oscars, was the movie that nobody expected, that won people over just on its own strength of filmmaking.
And in part of the effort to make this ceremony sort of more relevant, more engaging, we saw more musical performances than we have in the past, including from one of my personal favorites, Beyonce.
Beyonce kicked off the Oscars on the Compton tennis courts, those very same tennis courts where Venus and Serena Williams got their start in the tennis game. And now throughout the night there were performances by Reba McEntire, by Megan Thee Stallion, and the rest of the cast of Encanto. And of course, last night's winner for Best Original Song, Billie Eilish, with her brother Phineas, and of course they won for the No Time to Die song, No Time to Die.
Yeah, from James Bond.
From James
Great
Bond.
James Bond theme.
A storied tradition of James Bond films winning Best Original Song, and this was a pretty good one, and I think it was a very moving Oscar because they were just so happy to be there.
Yeah, it certainly captured the energy of that film. Now, music also won over the voters in the documentary category. Questlove's Summer of Soul took home the Oscar for Best Documentary. We'll leave you with a clip from that film. In the meantime, I want to thank Ben Kroll, our film critic. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Keep going to the movies, guys. Keep going to the movies.
You heard him. For more arts and culture news, you can always head to our website. We're also on social media. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.
Versailles, Mont Saint-Michel, the Louvre are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbors many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24. Discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.
Special event.
Every 5 years, France 24 brings you coverage of the French presidential election. The question this year is, will President Macron be re-elected for another term? Or will he be beaten by one of the candidates determined to defeat him? France 24 will cover the electoral campaign, meeting the French people, the candidates and their supporters until the vote in April. Follow the French presidential election every day on France 24 and France24.com.
Ukrainian and Russian delegations heading to Turkey for a fresh round of in-person peace talks. Kyiv, for its part, says it's ready to discuss Ukraine adopting a neutral status. A historic summit in Israel brings together its top diplomat with counterparts from several Arab states, along with the U.S. Topping the agenda, security concerns centering on Iran. And the Oscars creating quite the buzz after Will Smith smacked Chris Rock in the face over a joke made about his wife. More on that and other notable moments of the night coming up in the program. You're watching France 24. Thanks for joining us here in the newsroom. I'm Claire Rush. A new round of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia is expected to get underway tomorrow in Turkey. Delegations are arriving in the country today, according to the Kremlin. Well, Turkey hosted the previous round of high-level in-person talks more than 2 weeks ago. Negotiators have held regular talks via video conference, but there have been no breakthroughs so far, with both sides describing efforts as difficult. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he is ready to discuss Ukraine adopting neutrality, but he's also insisted the country's sovereignty is a red line. Sinead McCausland tells us more.
As Russia's invasion of Ukraine grinds on, President Volodymyr Zelensky continues to rally support for his beleaguered country, speaking with 4 prominent Russian journalists on Sunday in a 90-minute video call, in which Zelensky said he's ready to consider a key Russian demand.
Гарантии безопасности и нейтралитет, безъядерный статус нашего государства, мы готовы на него идти. Это самый главный пункт. Это был первый принципиальный пункт для Российской Федерации, насколько я помню. И насколько мне помнится, что они из-за этого начали войну.
Adopting a neutral status would mean abandoning Ukraine's ambition to one day join the NATO military alliance. Other neutral countries like Sweden and Finland have been proposed as models. Zelensky says such a status would need to be put to a referendum. He also demanded that Russian troops withdraw to their pre-invasion positions before discussing the status of the eastern Donbass region, where pro-Russia separatists have been fighting a war of secession since 2014.
Я понимаю, что освободить полностью территорию, заставить Россию невозможно. Это приведет к Третьей мировой войне. Я прекрасно все понимаю и отдаю себе отчет. Поэтому я и говорю, это компромисс, да, компромисс. Вернитесь туда, с чего все началось, и там попытаемся решить вопрос Донбасса. Сложный вопрос Донбасса.
Despite the willingness to compromise, Zelensky refuses to engage with Moscow's other demands, including the demilitarization of Ukraine. The next round of peace talks are set to take place this week in Turkey. Expectations are low, as Ukraine's military intelligence service says Moscow's ultimate goal is a partition of the country.
Since their invasion began, Russian troops have faced stiff resistance from Ukrainian forces, including from the Aerorozvidka. France 24's Gwendolyn Dubono met one of the leaders of this elite drone pilot unit, a rare interview translated into English by Charles Pellegrin.
They're the eyes of Ukrainian soldiers on the battleground. This man is one of the commanders of a squadron of drone pilots. They operate reconnaissance drones as well as combat ones.
We work night and day. We observe them. We determine their exact location, fly, and then strike. Sometimes they hear us because some drones have a recognizable sound. When they hear that sound, then we can see them running away in a panic, lying down, hiding, but not all of them make it.
His unit is now able to make its own attack drones, like this one. He says Russian troops have since adapted.
Our main challenge is the lack of equipment. We have to hand it to our enemy. They work very hard, and they're very good at counter-operations, at electronic warfare. So almost every day we lose equipment. That's why we keep asking for support. We need it, and we see new equipment come from the world over.
The daily flights over the capital confirm that Russian forces have been struggling in this region.
We can see what's happening around Kiev as well. They're protecting themselves, and we can see that it's beginning to look bad for some of them. Sometimes they're cut off from their supply lines, their ammunition, food, and fuel. It's demoralizing them, and we can see it.
The situation on the Eastern Front is very different. His unit conducts hundreds of missions there every day, and they're aware they're in it for the long haul.
Well, the humanitarian crisis on the ground also intensifying. More than 3.8 million Ukrainians have now fled the country, according to the UN. Some 90% of them women and children, and more than half arriving in Poland. Refugees continue to arrive in the neighboring country in large numbers, although single-day border crossings do appear to have slowed from a peak earlier in the month. The UN estimates that another 6.5 million people have been internally displaced inside Ukraine. One of Russia's top independent newspapers, Novaya Gazeta, has suspended publication until the end of what Moscow calls its special operation in Ukraine. Earlier on Monday, the outlet learned of another formal warning from Russia's state communications watchdog, its second since last week, prompting it to pause operations. While its chief editor, Dmitry Muratov, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year, said it was a difficult decision. The move also comes on the heels of a recently passed law in Russia threatening up to 15 years in jail for spreading fake news about Russia's military operations. Moving on, Russia's economy is feeling the effect of sanctions. Scores of Western brands have pulled out of the Russian market, and the fall of the ruble has sent inflation spiraling upwards. But in spite of this, popular support for Vladimir Putin appears to remain stable. Our team in Moscow reports.
Alexander, a Muscovite pensioner, gets his groceries at ever higher prices.
What really astonished me was the price of these peppers, 277 rubles a kilo, for vegetables.
Since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's currency has collapsed and inflation is rising. Like all Russians, Alexander is having to adapt.
Fruit juice, for example. I can't buy the one I want. I have to buy things that are on special.
To help him relativize these problems, Alexander can count on Russian TV.
You see, there are shortages all over the world. It's not just here that prices are rising.
Sometimes he has the feeling the TV doesn't say the whole truth.
I suppose that it's probably true, because it seems plausible, highly plausible, but at the same time, not at all, really not at all. But we can't rule it out either. So even if you think maybe it's not, it's probably true.
Some propaganda messages leave Alexander with serious doubts, though.
В руки наших военных попали документы, которые подтверждают, Киев готовился к агрессии против России.
An attack from Ukraine against Crimea? I doubt it. They know that would have meant open war with Russia.
Nevertheless, Alexander supports his country and his president.
Blaming Putin for all ills is like blaming Stalin. It's the course of politics and history that forced them to take certain decisions. They had no choice. You have to understand me. I'm Russian, and I can't very well see how I could not support my country. I can criticize it or not like it, but in a situation like this, I must support it. It's like a wife. A good wife may think her husband is right or not, but in any case, she has to stand by him and reload his ammunition.
Alexander has a character trait that's vital for Russians today more than ever: resignation.
Moving on to another one of our top stories at this hour, the top diplomats of Israel, the U.S., and 4 Arab states held a landmark meeting today, this Monday. The talks brought together for the first time on Israeli soil the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. Egypt's top diplomat was also present. Well, concluding the summit, Israel said it would be held again in the future as it looks to boost ties with Arab states in a bid to deter Iran, its biggest rival in the region. Regional concerns about the ongoing negotiations to revive the Iran nuclear deal had been high on the meeting's agenda.
Finally, as neighbors, and in the case of the United States, as friends, we will also work together to confront common security challenges and threats, including those from Iran and its proxies.
This new architecture, the shared capabilities we are building, intimidates and deters our common enemies, first and foremost, Iran and its proxies. They certainly have something to fear. What will stop them is not hesitation or being conciliatory, but rather determination and strength.
Israel correspondent Iris Mackler covered the summit for us. I asked her earlier if any major announcements came out of it.
I don't know that there were really any major announcements other than that this summit, there is a plan to hold it annually, to upgrade it to a commercial and security forum that will take place for these participants and any other participants across the region. And I think that is significant. It's also being seen as a display of unity in the face of Iran, certainly, but a show of strength from, I guess it's a sign of how much of the Abraham Accords always was that the anti-Iranian stance was always a motive there. I think another thing that was quite interesting was how amazed all the participants were, each one in his speech, that they were there in Israel having this meeting together. I think Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, actually said the impossible has become possible, which lets you know nothing is impossible. So I think there is definitely a feeling that they were participating at something historic, and whatever security decisions they came to, we didn't hear about them.
And Iris, absent from this summit were the Palestinians. How has Palestinian leadership been reacting to this meeting?
That's right. It's quite interesting. We did hear from one Palestinian official. They described it as the Nakba Forum, the Catastrophe Forum. I don't think that the Palestinian leadership really has known how to handle this from the start. They definitely feel abandoned. Israel's foreign minister said he would invite the Palestinians to come if it became an annual forum. It would be very interesting to see if they did agree to go. We did see the King of Jordan arriving in Ramallah, a rare visit. He arrived by helicopter at the Muqata, is currently meeting, in fact, with the Palestinian president. But all eyes were on this forum, I think, including there, although he is there to try to defuse tensions ahead of Ramadan, which is starting this week.
France 24's Iris Mackler reporting earlier from Jerusalem. And finally, this year's Oscars, likely to go down in history as the one where Will Smith smacked Chris Rock in the face over a joke the comedian made about his wife. But the film awards ceremony also featured other notable firsts. Catherine Viette tells us more.
Oh, wow!
It was the smack heard around the world after a joke went wrong at the Oscars. Chris Rock's comments on Jada Pinkett Smith's hairdo did not sit well with her husband, Will Smith. After the onstage slap, Smith shouted profanities at the comedian.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth!
Shortly after the incident, Smith won the Best Actor Oscar for King Richard, where he played the father of tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams. In his tearful and rambling acceptance speech, Smith compared himself to Williams.
I want to apologize to the Academy. I want to apologize to all my fellow nominees. Art imitates life. I look like the crazy father, just like they said. I look like crazy father, just like they said about Richard Williams.
Smith's viral moment overshadowing the rest of the evening, even as history was being made in the Best Picture category. Apple TV film Coda won the coveted top honor, a first for a streaming service. The title stands for Child of Deaf Adult and stars deaf actors in lead roles. Actor Troy Kotzer, who plays the deaf father of a girl who can hear and wants to pursue a music career, won Best Supporting Actor, another first.
This is amazing to be here on this journey. I cannot believe I'm here. Thank you so much to all the members of the Academy for recognizing my work.
The film also won Best Adapted Screenplay. Jane Campion took home the Best Director Oscar for Power of the Dog, while Jessica Chastain turned her role as Tammy Faye Baker from The Eyes of Tammy Faye into Best Actress Gold. Wrapping up the acting categories, Ariana DeBose, following in the footsteps of Rita Moreno, also won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her portrayal of Anita in West Side Story.
Well, that's all from me for now, but stay with us here on France 24. More world news coming up for you shortly.
Hello and welcome to Access Asia. Coming up,
Sri Lanka seeks another $1 billion from India. The country is facing its worst economic meltdown since independence from Britain in 1948. Shanghai locks down and Singapore opens up. Two different tales of zero COVID strategy, the aggressive policy taking a toll on the economy and the people. And we take a look at the cultural phenomenon that is One Piece. A Japanese series is a best-selling manga of all time. We'll find out why it's beloved around the world. Talks on an IMF bailout are expected to begin next month. In the meantime, Sri Lanka has sought an additional credit line of $1 billion from India. To get an idea of just how bad the economic crisis is in Sri Lanka, consider that two major newspapers are suspending their print editions because of a lack of paper. The government is unable to import essential items like food and medicine. Nick Rushworth has more.
Tusita Hadaragama is joining a long queue of vehicles. He's hoping to fill up his tank so he can make the 40-kilometer journey to his job as a driver in the Sri Lankan capital.
I have to travel to work in Colombo. A litre of petrol that cost 120 rupees 3 months ago now costs more than double. It's very difficult for us to manage. I need petrol to go to work.
People across Sri Lanka are feeling the pain of the country's worst economic crisis in decades. The prices of essential goods have soared. There is a shortage of everything from fuel to food.
Things are difficult. Prices are rising daily. I cook fewer things and smaller quantities. Before, when I cooked 3 potatoes, I now use only 2.
Tusita and Varuni say they are no longer making ends meet.
At this rate, not only me, but most Sri Lankans will have to starve and die of starvation. Even if you have money, there are no goods to buy. And when there are things to buy, there's no money. There are queues for fuel, milk powder, and for gas.
Historically weak government finances, poorly timed tax cuts, and then the COVID-19 pandemic have pummeled the Sri Lankan economy. Inflation has edged just above 15%, and the country only has $2 billion in foreign currency reserves. It needs almost double that to pay the foreign currency debt due for the rest of the year. Protesters tried to storm the Sri Lankan president's office in mid-March as anger flared over the crisis. The government of Gotabaya Rajapaksa is seeking more help from neighbouring India and from the IMF to try and reverse the worsening economic situation.
After Shanghai recently reported a new daily record for asymptomatic coronavirus infections, the city locking down in 2 stages. It's the biggest step taken in Shanghai since the outbreak began more than 2 years ago. But some residents complain that the cost of China's strict and aggressive zero-COVID strategy has become too great.
Shanghai is seeing its highest daily numbers of COVID cases since the start of the pandemic. And the metropolis of 26 million people is running slow. Even before the latest lockdowns were announced, hundreds of residential compounds were being isolated, surveilled and barricaded to carry out as many tests as possible. Businesses are suffering. With no customers coming, this restaurant has been closed for 2 weeks. And now? China is clinging to its drastic measures. Throughout the country, infected people and contacts are traced as they have been before using smartphone data. They're then isolated for at least 2 weeks. Hospitals are struggling to deal with all the patients. In Shanghai, even asymptomatic cases are hospitalized. Patients wait to be seen to in groups of hundreds with no social distancing. The measures have prompted anger in some quarters. In this neighborhood of Shenzhen, which has been locked down for over a month, residents are at the end of their tether. Until this wave, China thought it had got rid of COVID. Now its return is causing distress. Requests for consultations for this psychologist have risen by almost a third in recent weeks.
所以他会把自己的注意力集中在这个病毒这件事情上。 那可能会加剧这种人的恐慌，引发一些比如惊恐发作啊这些或者焦虑过于严重的这些状况。
Beijing is particularly determined to maintain zero COVID because China's elderly population is vulnerable. Half of those over the age of 80 have yet to receive 2 doses of a vaccine.
Meanwhile, Singapore, which has its own zero-COVID approach, is opening up to tourists. Tourism, a vital sector of the economy, and there are hopes that travelers will return after being kept out of the country for the past 2 years. Our team on the ground reports.
It's finally time for Nicholas to start his holiday. After arriving from Hong Kong via a special travel lane for vaccinated people, he didn't have to spend a single day in quarantine.
And I was surprised actually how quick it was when I got here, that you do the test and within 10 or 15 minutes they give you a text message saying you're good to go. And there's a great sense of, feeling freer again.
People who have tested positive for COVID-19 in the past 3 months do not need to be tested again, even when they arrive in Singapore. This is a dramatic change in approach in a country that was virtually closed for 2 years.
The people are so welcoming, so pleased to see tourists again. So they're particularly attentive.
They're vigilant too. Visitors and residents are unable to enter shops unless they scan a QR code linked to a tracing app devised by the Singapore authorities. Hotels, meanwhile, have turned to new ways to attract guests. The largest Ritz-Carlton in the world is displaying more than 4,000 artworks and an augmented reality tour for business guests and art lovers.
I really hope I can catch one though. It flies too fast. I think VR will be a very good alternative for people, especially people who have safety concerns about pandemic. There's definitely a market for it.
You're under one roof, not needing to travel, not needing to mingle with tourists, and do a public transport. The hotel becomes a destination.
As residents of the third richest country in the world, based on per capita GDP, Singaporeans prevented from travelling abroad by the virus are making more of local attractions, even under COVID-19 restrictions.
There's gaps between this is like designated areas.
But it's difficult to feel a genuine sense of escape from daily life on this tiny island.
Before COVID, we used to go to Bali a lot. And then we just visited a lot of beach clubs, hung by the beach. We wouldn't be here, we'll choose overseas where we can explore other things.
The borders are opening up, we'll be going soon.
Yeah.
Singapore is not alone in overcoming its caution. After a long pandemic, Thailand, the Philippines and other countries in the region are finally welcoming back visitors.
The Japanese mega-series One Piece, written and illustrated by Ichiro Odo, has created an absolute craze with the release of its latest weekly installment, Chapter 1044. But One Piece has long been a hit. Since its original run 25 years ago, it has been seen nearly 500 million copies in circulation. It's considered the best-selling manga series in history. And the story is a treasure quest with dozens of characters weaving in humor as it deals with some mature topics like politics, war, and the environment. Here to help us understand it all is Benoit Huot from the French publisher Glénat. Hello to you, Benoit. Thank you for coming in. No spoilers for the fans, but why is the release of this latest chapter, 1044, creating such a buzz?
It is because in the part of this story, the stakes are very high because One Piece has a lot of chapters and the heroes become mightier and mightier, and we know that the end is near, even if it is in some years, not the end of this year, but in some years. And so because the stakes are high and Luffy and his crew fight a very powerful opponent.
Yes, Luffy being one of the main characters.
Yeah. So the readers now are reading the chapters as soon as they are released in Japan. And so each week they can discover what happens to Luffy and the others. And so this is why this chapter 144 is very important.
Yeah, if we have viewers that are familiar with One Piece, or for those of the watching that aren't familiar with One Piece, explain why it's become such a cultural phenomenon, because it's really popular all around the world.
Yes, One Piece is a very very popular phenomenon because, first of all, it is a story of pirates. It is a treasure chase, and Luffy is on a trip, and with his boat, he stops on islands and creates a crew to find the One Piece. Nobody knows what is the One Piece. Every reader has its own opinion, but for the moment, nobody knows.
But on the face of it, so far, it sounds like it's more of a children's story, but there are a lot of adults who love this story.
Yes, yeah, there are a lot of adults who love this story because you can read One Piece according different level. First, you can read it as an adventure story with fight, with opponent, and with that kind of events. And then when you are older, you can see adult themes such as slavery, such as freedom, such as how to control the people and to manipulate them. So you can see another message from the author. You have the pleasure and the fun of reading, and you have also some way of thinking about the different problems of the world.
And explain how One Piece is sort of structured for our viewers. A new installment comes out every week?
Yes, Eiichiro Oda in Japan publishes one chapter every week. To be honest, 3 chapters per month, because there is one week where it does not work.
When we look at One Piece, is there any other franchise you can compare it to that's been as successful?
Well, in manga, I do not think this is the case. It is because first, One Piece was in the Guinness Book of Records as the first series published by one author, and yes, there are many supports like anime CDs and others. So it is a huge phenomenon because there are dozens, if not hundreds, of characters, and so every reader can have its own love for the characters.
All right, thank you very much, Benoit. And if you're curious about One Piece, don't be intimidated. Benoit assures me you can jump in even now after 1,000 chapters into the saga. That brings us to the end of this edition. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.
From North America to the southern tip of Patagonia, join us for a look at the latest political, economic, cultural and social news from the Americas.
Inside the Americas, presented by Jeannie Godula on France 24 and France24.com.
War has once more reared its head in Europe, recalling the darkest hours of our history.
Kiev is still about 30 kilometers away.
France 24 is providing constant coverage of events in Ukraine. Our teams on the ground and in the studio will keep you informed of all the latest developments.
They're collecting 400 meters of...
Stay informed, stay aware.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24. Coming up, Ukraine on the counter-offensive. The mayor of Irpin claims the liberation of that strategic suburb of the capital. Elsewhere, the U.S. confirms the retaking of the northeast town of Trotsyanets. The newspaper of last year's Nobel Peace Prize winner suspends publication. Novaya Gazeta, the latest casualty of tightening Russian war censorship. A show of deterrence to Iran and its proxies. That's the claim by Israel after top diplomats from nations who normalized ties with the country met in the Negev desert along with the U.S. Secretary of State. In the next hour, the France 24 debate, did Joe go rogue, or was it carefully crafted when the U.S. president called Vladimir Putin a butcher unfit for power? Beyond the U.S., which has since insisted that it does not have a strategy for regime change, there's the question of whether Biden's words help or hurt Ukraine's cause. Your thoughts on Facebook and Twitter, #F24Debate. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Call it another casualty of war. Russia's Novaya Gazeta newspaper suspending online and print activities till the end of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The paper, whose editor, Dmitry Muratov, was co-winner of last year's Nobel Peace Prize, said it's already had to remove content relating to what the Kremlin brands a special military operation. Novaya Gazeta adding it had just received another warning from the state communications regulator. Well, for more, Moscow correspondent Nick Holdsworth is with us here in the studio. Thanks for joining us. Nick, this announcement of the suspension by Novaya Gazeta, it follows a stream of other Russian independent media who've had to decamp.
That's right. I mean, just a few weeks ago, shortly after the war started, the independent channel Dost TV, Rain TV, they resigned en masse on air and walked off and replaced on screen their broadcast with a reel of the ballet that had played during the 1991 attempted coup, Swan Lake. And others have closed down. Echo Moskvy, an independent radio station, they shut up shop about a week ago. And now we have Novaya Gazeta and Dmitry Muratov, who got the Nobel Prize, as you just mentioned, a very, very well-known figure. And they had tried to negotiate their way through this new law, saying that they couldn't call this a war, they had to call it a special military operation. They couldn't use any independent sources, they could only rely upon Russian government sources. And initially, some viewers may recall, they printed an edition right at the beginning of the war, just over a month ago, they printed an edition in Russian and Ukrainian as a sign of solidarity. That later went online only, and now they've got to shut up shop because they can no longer function, even though they've been trying to find a way between the lines in what is increasingly a war against Russia's own people, as well as a war against Ukraine.
And the story's all the more significant that we saw on Sunday Ukraine's president grant an interview to Russian independent media, among them a newspaper that's a holdover from the Soviet era, Kommersant, the business daily. What's their future when you hear of what Novaya Gazeta's decided?
Well, Kommersant was actually one of the early newspapers to come out against the war in effect. There was an open letter from a dozen or so of its diplomatic and foreign correspondents very early on, calling this out as a war of aggression that Russia should not be engaged in. They were promptly sacked. Now, Kommersant used to be a very independent paper. It got taken over. I don't recall exactly who took it over. It may have become an arm of Gazprom Media. I know that Gazprom has several media in its stable. Now, Kommersant has again carefully trod a line. Now, that interview on a video platform had a few people, including a chief editor from Rain TV, from TV Dost. Interesting. Zelensky is obviously trying to get a message out to those Russians, those very few Russians, sadly, who are still watching independent media, because you can't access those media, apart from Kommersant, I suspect, unless you've got a VPN and can access content online. I'm not sure you can access a lot of independent media in Russia unless you've got one of those devices attached to you.
I was going to ask you, final question on this is, with one by one, all these independent media shutting down, I know it's a minority, but still there's a lot of Russians who want to get their news from these outlets.
Yeah, from what I recall, the last numbers that TV Rain had, something like 600,000 in its heyday. It had several million. Of course, Vladimir Putin started his career in the Kremlin by shutting down independent media, and he's ended his career by shutting down any kind of media at all.
All right, Nick Holdsworth, many thanks for that. The mayor of the Kyiv suburb of Irpin now claims that Ukrainian forces have seized back full control of that northwest suburb of the capital. It's been one of the main flashpoints of fighting with Russian troops.
We have good news today. We have freed Irpin. Now we are carrying out a mopping up operation. It's not possible to return to Irpin yet. It's not safe yet. We are consolidating our new positions. Next, we will move to free Bucha, Hostomel and Vorzel.
For more, let's cross live to Kyiv and correspondent Gulliver Cragg. Gulliver, you heard the mayor there. Is there confirmation?
Well, we can't independently confirm it. No, the mayor himself said that it's still not safe to return to Irpin. And I think that we should take what he's saying at face value. When he says that there's going to be a mopping up operation, that doesn't mean cleaning the streets. That means that they still believe that there are Russian combatants in the town, and that's why there's still likely to be some fighting on the streets of Irpin. According to the mayor, the Ukrainians are now firmly in control, but we have seen the Ukrainians claim to be firmly in control of other places. For example, Makariv, a town to the west of Kyiv, about 60 kilometers to the west of Kyiv, and then it turned out that there was more fighting there and the Russians bombarded it again. So I wouldn't rule out a Russian counter-offensive, if you like, to retake Irpin. I imagine that the situation there is still quite dangerous and unstable, but the broader picture is that the Ukrainian forces are having considerable successes with their counterattacks, in particular around those northwestern satellite towns just outside Kyiv.
Yeah, we also have news. The United States says that it can confirm the retaking of the northeast town of Trotsianets. Again, are these just small incremental gains? Is it one step backwards, two step forwards for the Russian? What more do we know about those fronts as well?
Well, the Ukrainians claim to have reclaimed control of Trostianets, I think yesterday, if not the day before yesterday. Obviously, American confirmation of it lends credence to that. But the Americans, remember, have also said that they no longer consider Kherson, a city in the south of Ukraine, to be fully occupied by the Russians. And people in Kherson that I've been in touch with rather dispute that, because much as they would like to see their city liberated by Ukrainian forces, these people anyway, that's not what they're seeing on the ground. They said the Russians are still very much in control, and if there is any successful counteroffensive going on around Kherson, it's still a very long way from the city centre. So I think there's sometimes a bit of wishful thinking on the Americans' part as well. What else can we say about the fighting that's going on in Ukraine? It is a story of Ukrainian counterattacks in much of the country, but not in the eastern Donbass region. That's what the Ukrainian main military spokesman said today. He said in Donbass, the Russians are still very much on the offensive and threatening towns such as Rubizhne, though he did note that Avdiivka and Mariinka, which are two satellite towns of Donetsk. Donetsk, of course, has been under the control of Russian-backed separatists since 2014, but Avdiivka and Mariinka remained under Ukrainian control and are very heavily fortified. According to the Ukrainian military, they are still under Ukrainian control, despite being so close to the real nerve center, if you like, or the stronghold of the Russian-backed forces in Donbass.
Situation where you are in the capital calmed this Monday?
Well, we can hear explosions in the distance, and I guess that was part of the battle for Irpin, and perhaps now the ongoing battle, if what the mayor of Irpin says is to be believed, and the artillery is no longer needing to be used for fighting for Irpin, the ongoing battle for the neighbouring towns of Bucha and Hostomel. But I have to admit, I haven't been out in that direction in order to try to see closer for myself. I wouldn't say it was any quieter today, really, in the centre of Kyiv than it was yesterday or the day before. You just constantly hear booms far away in the distance and try to work out what they are. That's just part of life here these days.
Gulliver, there's the fighting, and there's at the same time authorities in Kyiv preparing for later, saying they're gathering evidence of war crimes.
Yes, today I went to a press conference by Ukraine's General Prosecutor, Irina Venediktova, who says that the country has opened up numerous cases accusing the Russians of war crimes, which range from targeting civilian buildings to shooting civilians in towns and villages that the Russians occupied. There is some photographic and video evidence of that, I believe, as well as eyewitness accounts of those there in towns that were subsequently liberated by the Ukrainians. She also said that they are accusing the Russians. There are many people who have been accusing Russian soldiers of rape and other sexual crimes, and they even have one Russian soldier who's in detention who is accused of that. So there's only one case where they've actually got an accused person in detention, but she said there are many more cases than that. And then there's also this term of genocide, which is being used very widely in Ukraine, particularly in reference to what's happened to Mariupol. And Irina Venediktova said the country was looking into accusing Russia of the crime against humanity that is genocide. I think looking at it from an objective point of view, many people might dispute that the intention was to kill everybody in Mariupol, which I think would have to make it really fit the pure definition of genocide. But certainly the indiscriminate shelling of citizens, of civilians in Mariupol, and even those who are trying to flee, has made many Ukrainians very angry. And genocide is a term that a lot of them are using at the moment to describe Vladimir Putin's intentions against Ukrainians.
Gulliver Cragg reporting live from Kyiv. And when techies go to the front, it offers France 24 a rare look into what they're doing, with an elite drone unit that our own Gwendoline Debonneau was able to follow. It's a report read by Charles Pellegrin.
They're the eyes of Ukrainian soldiers on the battleground. This man is one of the commanders of a squadron of drone pilots. They operate reconnaissance drones as well as combat ones.
We work night and day. We observe them. We determine their exact location, fly, and then strike. Sometimes they hear us because some drones have a recognizable sound. When they hear that sound, then we can see them running away in a panic, lying down, hiding, but not all of them make it.
His unit is now able to make its own attack drones, like this one. He says Russian troops have since adapted.
Our main challenge is the lack of equipment. We have to hand it to our enemy. They work very hard, and they're very good at counter-operations, at electronic warfare. So almost every day we lose equipment. That's why we keep asking for support. We need it, and we see new equipment come from the world over.
The daily flights over the capital confirm that Russian forces have been struggling in this region.
We can see what's happening around Kyiv as well. They're protecting themselves, and we can see that it's beginning to look bad for some of them. Sometimes they're cut off from their supply lines, their ammunition, food, and fuel. It's demoralizing them, and we can see it.
The situation on the Eastern Front is very different. His unit conducts hundreds of missions there every day, and they're aware they're in it for the long haul.
Meanwhile, at the same time, you have the situation at the border, the main border crossing at Medica. One of the concerns is criminal gangs taking advantage of the situation there. France 24's team has this report read by Ellen Gainsford.
Since the refugee crisis began here in Poland, donations of food, medicine and clothes have flooded in from all over the world. Well, here in Medica, at the border crossing, there are stands where refugees can help themselves to these products. But according to the Polish police, some criminals are taking advantage of this system and taking products to resell at a profit. Well, it's not just here that this practice is happening. We spoke to one NGO who said they'd had whole vans of aid go missing. And they've told us what measures they've now put in place to prevent this from happening.
So right now we have a couple means. We have double verification. So we receive, our boss takes a photo of the truck when it's finish loading in the back of the truck, so you see how the boxes are stacked up. And then when they receive at their target in Ukraine, they then receive a photo back of the truck looking the same. The boxes are all there, and an area around it to show that the truck has arrived at the specified location and it's safe.
Well, another security issue the police are facing here is human trafficking. Posted around the border crossing are leaflets like this, which warn refugees about the traffickers working in their area. Well, it advises refugees not to give away their passports, to be wary of immediate job offers, and only to take official transportation. The refugees crossing over are mainly women and children, and this group is unfortunately vulnerable to targeting by criminals.
It's a message sent to Iran, the words of Israel's foreign minister meeting with top diplomats from the United States, but also signatories of those 2020 Abraham Accords, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, and Morocco, the five-way talks taking place in the Negev desert. Charles Pellegrin has more.
The Negev desert was the perfect setting for a meeting that was supposed to showcase the warming relations between Israel and its Sunni Arab neighbors. After years of hostility, all the talk was about cooperation and peace building, a change made possible by the Abraham Accords brokered by the Trump administration in 2020.
I think what we are trying to achieve here today is changing the narrative, creating a different future, and building on better hope for us and for our kids and grandkids.
But there are real-world interests binding these nations together.
Shared capabilities we are building intimidates and deters our common enemies, first and foremost, Iran and its proxies.
Despite ongoing talks with Tehran to revive a 2015 nuclear deal, Antony Blinken reassured his counterparts that Washington would continue to work with them to counter Iranian security threats. But closer ties here have led to a breakdown elsewhere, namely with the Palestinian territories. The U.S. emphasized that normalization of relations isn't the same thing as progress in resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where talks have been stalled since 2014. The Palestinian Prime Minister condemned the summit.
Unless the occupation ends, Arab normalization meetings are nothing but an illusion and a free reward for Israel.
Israel is keeping the door open for Palestinian representatives to take part in future iterations of this event.
For more, let's go to Tel Aviv. Political analyst Dalia Scheindlin is contributor to Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
It was nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
There's something a little bit surreal about this meeting when you think of the context. First off, those strong words by Yair Lapid, the foreign minister, on Iran. And yet at the same time, we know that we could possibly be days from the rekindling of the 2015 nuclear agreement that Israelis are so dead against. Was it awkward?
I wouldn't say it was awkward for the Israeli public, although it is certainly historic for the Israeli public. This is getting a lot of coverage. It's something we have not really ever seen, to see all these Arab states hosted in Israel. But it's certainly not a surprise that those were the words that were spoken. I would say that the issue of Iran, the potential for signing the JCPOA or a renewed version of the JCPOA, was absolutely the background both for this conference in the immediate sense, so that these new allies, some of them are old allies with Israel and Egypt, can coordinate, probably think through their strategy together. But also that was the historic backdrop to the signing of the Abraham Accords to begin with. A large part of the basis for those accords were the emerging relations between Israel and the Gulf states, which had been there under the surface for years, but really took on new urgency due to the need or the perceived need or the interest of those states in aligning themselves or at least cooperating and sharing information as a security alliance against Iran. In fact, some people at the, I would say at the pundit level are even talking about whether this is some sort of NATO-like emerging relationship. It's far from that, but I do think that is the overriding interest, how these countries will deal with what they consider to be an existential threat of Iran, which what they perceive is that re-signing of this JCPOA, of the deal to limit Iran's nuclear program, will not in fact limit it. They view that as a deal that could be exacerbating the threat.
So the odd man out in all this is Antony Blinken. When you look at the leaders, again, I'll just repeat them for our viewers, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, Morocco, and of course the hosts, Israel.
Yes, definitely. I should point out that not all of those are Abraham Accord partners. Again, Israel and Egypt have had a long-standing relationship, and the fourth partner of the Abraham Accords, Sudan, is not at the table because of all the instability and uncertainty in Sudan. Anthony Blinken, I mean, I wouldn't say he's the odd man out. He's probably the one, he's, the most important guest at the party in a way. He is the one that has to either communicate, the American and the great powers' interest in signing this deal and sell it to the other participants, if you will. And they have to, in their perspective, they want to communicate to him why they see the deal as such a threat. I think each side is doing its best to possibly, well, certainly the Israel and the Arab states are trying to raise the toughest possible critiques. And some of those critiques they're even raising very stringently in public so that the ultimate position that I think they hope that they'll be able to pull the negotiations for a deal closer and closer in their direction. But I do think that there is a sense of inevitability about this deal. At least that's how it's being portrayed here. And I think that Blinken will want to communicate, we are here to listen to your concerns. We want this deal signed, but we better figure out how we're going to all accommodate each other. And the Israeli government is also making a point of saying we are not going to be as rejectionist about this as the Netanyahu government was in terms of taking on a public fight. At the same time, the Israeli government is talking very tough against the agreement.
Yeah, talking very tough against the Iran agreement. Let's listen to the U.S. Secretary of State because Antony Blinken gave a nod to the fact that he visited earlier on Monday with the Palestinian president.
We have to be clear that these regional peace agreements are not a substitute for progress between Palestinians and Israelis. One of the issues we discussed today was how countries involved in the Abraham Accords and normalization, as well as those that have long-standing diplomatic relationships with Israel, can support the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people in concrete ways and have a positive impact on the daily lives of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza.
Dahlia Scheindlin, is that just the United States going through the motions, saying what needs to be said, or is there a real difference?
That's a very complicated question. I think that at the moment it is going through the motions because until there is a renewed deal signed with Iran, a new joint comprehensive plan of action, I don't think we're going to see any significant pressure on Israel from the U.S. to move ahead on something like conflict resolution with the Palestinians. And that's why you hear this language about let's try to do what we can to improve the lives of Palestinians, which is code in this region for if we improve their lives on a material and economic level, maybe we can postpone conflict resolution at the political level. But I do think that the Biden administration is certainly aware. I don't think there are any illusions either from the president himself or from Secretary Blinken that there is a need for a comprehensive political resolution to this conflict. There will be no other way to end the violence. And we have seen very tragically 2 attacks this week, which weren't directly related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict per se, but they are just a very strong reminder that violence flares up regularly. There is no other approach beyond political resolution to the conflict. And I do think the Secretary is aware of that. I'd like to hope. I've been very vocal about saying the Abraham Accords up until now have essentially functioned to marginalize both the Palestinians and the issue of reaching political resolution. But I think the U.S. is capable of taking the lead, hopefully once the Iran Accord is behind us, for better or for worse, not to make light of it. I do think it is a very urgent priority for the U.S. to take the lead on maybe leveraging the Abraham Accords to bring the Palestinians back into a process. It's very tricky. The relations are very delicate right now, to say the least, even bad. But there's no other approach. And I think that I would like to think the administration will plan to recommit itself, to rededicate itself to that issue at some point in the future. When and whether they will have partners on the Israeli side is very hard to say.
Yeah, the Abraham Accords, which were penned by the previous U.S. administration, brokered by Donald Trump and his Secretary of State, we've seen that some of the parts of that accord, for instance, the U.S. opening up a consulate in the Western Sahara, have gone nowhere. Did you get the sense today, Dahlia Scheindlin, that these Abraham Accords still have the mark of the Trump administration, or that they've evolved since?
I'd like to be able to give you a clear answer, but it's really an unknown. Nobody knew what these accords were really going to mean when they were signed. They looked like something that were almost possibly expedient and, political boost for both President Trump at the time in light of his reelection and the ongoing campaigns in Israel in which Netanyahu was hoping to get reelected. And they looked like a strategic military alliance, frankly, with Israel and the Gulf states. Since the end of the Trump administration and the change of the Israeli administration, I don't think anybody has been clear on what they will mean. Again, all I can say is what I think should happen with the Abraham Accords, which is that the U.S. should take the lead on leveraging those accords to help bring Israel and Palestine back into some sort of a process, and hopefully, eventually recommit to the some sort of better relations in the region, rather than a binary kind of NATO versus the enemies divide, which right now the Abraham Accords are essentially solidifying. That's what we're seeing in the case of this conference. I'd like to think they can be used for a better purpose, which is to help the countries even across that divide bridge it and eventually open up channels of negotiation, some of which have already begun over the last year. Saudi Arabia and Iran have been holding, communications, dialogues over the course of this last year 4 times. So these are the kinds of things that need to be, leveraged in the region. And if the Abraham Accords can contribute to that, again, I think the U.S. has a role to play in what I call repurposing the Accords to help bring those countries into more pragmatic and diplomatic relationships rather than deepening the military divide of the region. Highly militarized divide, I should say.
We're out of time, but just very briefly, there is the conversation that's the topic that's hogging every conversation, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Countries like Egypt buy wheat from both countries. Morocco does a lot of business with Russia. Israel does a lot of business with both. Is there a sense the U.S. is pushing the needle in that score?
That's also a very good question. I think that the Israeli position has been very clear and very strange. Very clear in its lack of clarity. Israel has been trying to keep something like a neutral position, which means balancing some sort of a commitment on the humanitarian level and helping out with medical supplies, while trying to be on Russia's good side so that it can play a sort of negotiation role. I say sort of because we don't know if any of these negotiations are doing anything. The problem, I think, with the Gulf states is a little bit different. They have been, certainly UAE has been trying to express a certain dissatisfaction with the U.S., and there has been a cagey relationship or cagey answer when the U.S. has tried to reach out to both Saudi Arabia and the UAE regarding producing and selling more oil to help try to keep prices down. The UAE hasn't, and Saudi, I should say, also haven't given clear answers on that, and I have no doubt that that is a topic that's being discussed between the Americans and the oil-producing states.
Dahlia Schein, yeah, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, but I want to thank you so much for joining us from Tel Aviv.
Thank you for having me.
Stay with us. Much more to come. More news, plus the day's business and sports.
Join us every day here on France 24 for the last stretch of the presidential race, the mother of all election, the presidential election. This is the time for the French to choose their president. We'll have all our special envoys on the campaign trail across the globe, the latest analysis, the best polls. Join us here on France 24.
France 2022, the campaign, on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. You're watching France 24. Coming up, Ukraine on the counteroffensive. The mayor of Irpin claims the liberation of that strategic suburb of the capital. Elsewhere, the U.S. confirms the retaking of the northeast town of Trosyanetsk. G7 nations formally reject Vladimir Putin's demand for oil and gas payment in rubles. This as brewing giants Carlsberg and Heineken become the latest Western companies to announce that they are leaving Russia. France enters the official campaign period ahead of the April 10th first round of the presidential elections. A muted campaign so far, dominated by the war in Ukraine. The mayor of Irpin near Kyiv claims that Ukrainian forces have seized back full control of that strategically located northwest suburb of the capital. It's been one of the main hotspots in the fighting with Russian troops near Kyiv. He says there are mopping up operations still ongoing and warning residents against returning. Elsewhere in the country, you have the Russians claiming they've destroyed ammunitions depots that provide the capital. Russia's defense ministry claims it's hit 41 Ukrainian military sites in the past 24 hours. Over in the town of Mykolaiv, Russian troops have withdrawn. Sinead McCausland and our colleagues at France 2 have more on that story.
It was not long ago this road was controlled by Russian forces, but recently troops have been pulling back from the strategic southern city Mykolaiv. For its civilians, the retreat means they can dare to hope. The Ukrainian flag flying once again here in Bashtanka, a town that was seized by the Russian army. Bashtanka is just a few kilometers from Mykolaiv city center. In this field, remnants of Russia's presence. This truck, used to shoot rockets, was destroyed by Ukrainians who defended their town.
Техніка проходила через наш город. І коли вони їхали, їм прострелювали колеса. Коли вони сюди дійшли, їх тут окончательно добили.
Following weeks of intense fighting with Russian forces, Ukrainian troops are seeing some gains on the ground.
Дуже велику. Вони герої.
Bashtanka has seen heavy shelling. Civilians have been left in shock. Still, there's some relief now that troops are no longer present.
Вулиці вже немає, вже людей тут немає. Це саме найхуже. Звісно, її вже немає тут.
The threat has gone for now in Mykolaiv, where there is a hope for calm, following days of intense targeted bombing since the start of Russia's invasion. For Moscow, Mykolaiv is a stepping stone to the key seaport of Odessa, but so far the city has been able to withstand the Russian offensive.
On the eve of the first face-to-face peace talks between Russia and Ukraine that are taking place in Turkey, Moscow's first face-to-face in 2 weeks, I should say, Moscow's foreign minister ruling out any summit encounter for the time being. Sergei Lavrov speaking as the U.S. has again cast doubt on the Kremlin's willingness and good faith when it comes to striking any kind of a deal.
He said he never refused to meet with President Zelensky. The only thing he considers essential, these meetings need to be well prepared. There's a crisis situation in Ukraine, the inter-Ukrainian conflict that has been growing for so many years, accumulating a huge number of problems. So just meeting to exchange opinions right now is simply counterproductive.
We're now less than 2 weeks before the French pick a president. Monday marks the start of the official campaign period, in which media here must provide all candidates who've qualified for the first round with equal airtime. Brian Quinn has more.
After months of jockeying for position, gathering endorsements from local officials, and making media appearances, France's 12 candidates for the 2022 presidential election are entering the home stretch. Monday marks the official start of the campaign season, with just less than 2 weeks to go before the first round of voting. Campaign posters making their first appearances across the country.
Aux gens de la commune pour aller voir leurs candidats.
et les choisir comme il faut, et bien choisir, je précise.
From now on, French broadcast media are required to provide each candidate with equal airtime, regardless of their chances for success. Campaign videos are also making their first appearances on publicly funded television this week, in accordance with the country's strict electoral laws. Ahead of Monday's opening, several candidates held campaign events as they try to fire up their supporters for the final push. Perennial far-right candidate Marine Le Pen was in Guadeloupe, where she was met with protests and heckling from anti-racist demonstrators, while her rival Éric Zemmour held a large rally in Paris. Left-wing candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, meanwhile, was in Marseille, where he said a vote for him would be the best way to keep the extreme right out of contention. French voters head to the polls on Sunday, April 10th. Assuming no candidate scores an outright majority, the top two vote winners will continue to a second round 2 weeks later on April 24th.
And for more, we joined France 24's Philippe Turle. You know, every 5 years there's a French presidential election, and you got to wonder, these laws about equal airtime and what you can and can't say, in theory, they're great, except now with the internet, you got to wonder about whether or not they're still as relevant as they once were.
Well, Francois, I'm showing my age now, but I've covered every French presidential election since 1988 and the re-election of François Mitterrand. And I haven't quite seen an election like this one for two reasons. First of all, because of the way things have changed, the old format of keeping the time that the different candidates can have on the air. I mean, even here at France 24, we're obliged to follow the rules which are put in place by the audiovisual watchdog body, the CSA, to make sure that one candidate doesn't speak more than another candidate. And there are even rows going on about that behind the scenes, not only here but elsewhere, about, well, why should we give as much time to someone who's going to get 0.5% in the election as to Emmanuel Macron, who's already in the lead with 28 to 30% of voting intentions. So there is a shift, I think, in the way that people perceive this election. And the second thing is that, as you were saying, it's dominated by, this election is dominated by the war in Ukraine. Every time there has been a talk about the election, the Ukraine war comes into what the candidates think and how they're going to deal with that and what their view is on Vladimir Putin, on Volodymyr Zelensky. So it's overridden, I think, some of the major concerns amongst the French voters, most notably spending power in France, which in a way has also been exacerbated by the fact that prices are going up because of the war, and we've seen an increase in petrol prices and all sorts of other things during this election campaign.
During the election campaign. So what you're basically saying is this is manna from heaven for the incumbent. Sorry to speak a little bit callously here.
Well, it is, but they've all got different views. I've been looking into it in a bit of research. Now, three candidates were embarrassed by the way they talked about Vladimir Putin. First of all, Éric Zemmour of the far right, who at one point said he was hoping there was going to be a Vladimir Putin in charge of France. Then there's Le Pen, Marine Le Pen, who's been to Russia to meet Vladimir Putin and who got a loan from a Russian bank during the previous election campaign in 2017 because no French bank wanted to finance her. And then there's Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the far left, who's also been known to give pretty positive comments about Vladimir Putin over the years. All three have been scurrying now to disclaim that and say they are against the war in Ukraine, but it has damaged them. Then, as far as sanctions are concerned against Ukraine, all of them agree on sanctions, but Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the far left and Le Pen on the far right are not sure they're going to be very efficient. On weapons, handing weapons over to the Ukrainians, there is Anne Hidalgo of the Socialist Party and Yannick Jadot of the Greens, who have called for more weapons to be sent to the Ukrainians, but they're the only two for that. And then there's a huge disagreement about migrants and what to do with them, and the biggest disagreement from Éric Zemmour of the far right, who says, yes, well, we can let the migrants in, but we're only going to let in the migrants who have relatives in France. The others can stay in Poland, and what we're going to do is send money to the Poles. They can look after them there.
One of the characteristics of this campaign is that it's, like you say, it's been overshadowed by the events in Ukraine. We're poised to have a rerun of the last runoff in 2017 when you had Emmanuel Macron beating the far right's candidate Marine Le Pen. what's strange is you mentioned some of those candidates on the left. The left is shrunk to nearly naught, it seems.
Well, there was a very interesting article in the Le Monde newspaper over the weekend, which said that the Socialist Party, remember the Socialist Party that was that of François Mitterrand, and the Socialist Party of François Hollande, who was president of France under 10 years ago, has sort of disappeared off the face of the earth, is only going to get 2.5%, 3% maximum voting provisions in this poll next month, which is like unheard of. And some political analysts in France are saying, well, they risk disappearing off the map, and the party could just disintegrate. And it's also the same for the Republican Party of Valérie Pécresse, who is in the same party as Jacques Chirac and Nicolas Sarkozy. She's in fourth position behind Emmanuel Macron, Marine Le Pen, Éric Zemmour, and even Jean-Luc Mélenchon on the far left. And I think that has been a major upset with the fact that she's not even getting the support of Nicolas Sarkozy, who she's been hoping would back her, and he still hasn't come forward and said that he's going to support her as a candidate for this election.
Philip Turrell, many thanks, and full coverage of the French elections right here on France 24 and France24.com. A movie that's aired on a streaming service, Apple, getting Best Picture, Coda at the Oscars, but that's not the only reason why the Academy Awards ceremony may go down in history this year.
Oh, wow! It was the smack heard around the world after a joke went wrong at the Oscars. Chris Rock's comments on Jada Pinkett Smith's hairdo did not sit well with her husband, Will Smith. After the onstage slap, Smith shouted profanities at the comedian.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
Shortly after the incident, Smith won the Best Actor Oscar for King Richard, where he played the father of tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams. In his tearful and rambling acceptance speech, Smith compared himself to Williams.
I want to apologize to the Academy. I want to apologize to all my fellow nominees. Art imitates life. I look like the crazy father, just like they said. I look like crazy father, just like they said about Richard Williams.
Smith's viral moment overshadowing the rest of the evening, even as history was being made in the Best Picture category. Apple TV film Coda won the coveted top honor, a first for a streaming service. The title stands for Child of Deaf Adult and stars deaf actors in lead roles. Actor Troy Kotsur, who plays the deaf father of a girl who can hear and wants to pursue a music career, won Best Supporting Actor, another first.
This is amazing to be here on this journey. I cannot believe I'm here. Thank you so much to all the members of the Academy for recognizing my work.
The film also won Best Adapted Screenplay. Jane Campion took home the Best Director Oscar for Power of the Dog, while Jessica Chastain turned her role as Tammy Faye Baker from The Eyes of Tammy Faye into Best Actress Gold. Wrapping up the acting categories, Ariana DeBose, following in the footsteps of Rita Moreno, also won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her portrayal of Anita in West Side Story.
Time now for business. We say hello to Kate Moody.
Francois.
Vladimir Putin last week saying you'd have to pay for oil and gas in rubles. How's it going?
Well, there hasn't been a lot of success so far. We've heard the G7 saying that it's pretty much out of the question. He did say that that would be the case for unfriendly countries anyway. That is, of course, the countries that have imposed sanctions against him. Usually commodities like oil and gas are bought and sold in dollars, sometimes in euros. The announcement did raise some more concerns about gas supplies, especially here in Europe, because Russia accounts for about 40% of European gas imports. Now, Kremlin spokesman this Monday said that European customers would need to find a way to meet those new demands because Russia would not provide gas for free. Russian companies are still trying to work out the modalities of just how that would function in real life. Germany's economy minister, though, said that making payments in rubles was, for his part, out of the question.
All G7 ministers have agreed that this is a unilateral and clear breach of existing contracts. They underlined once again that he concluded contracts are valid and the companies should and must respect them. This means a payment in rubles is unacceptable, and we call on the companies concerned not to comply with Putin's demand.
Well, Russia's position as a major provider of oil and gas was also center stage at an industry conference in Dubai. Representatives from the Kurdish region of northern Iraq said they had the capacity to make up for at least some of the energy shortfall in Europe. The United Arab Emirates, meanwhile, said that Western economies should be reasonable in their expectations of oil-producing countries amid calls for them to increase their oil output. The UAE energy minister said that OPEC and allies, including Russia, would remain central to the global market and that Russian oil supplies could not be replaced overnight.
I think the organization will stay. Russia is an important member, and unless someone is willing to come and bring 10 million barrels, we don't see that someone can substitute Russia, basically.
Well, the benchmark price for European natural gas rose about 4% this Monday, while oil prices have fallen. US WTI down as much as 8% earlier, trading closer to 5% in the red now, $107.85 per barrel there. The international benchmark Brent crude just over 114, also down 5% there. That's partly because Shanghai is heading back into lockdown to control the spread of COVID-19 infections. Analysts say that will at least temporarily dent global demand for oil. Shanghai is an important manufacturing and financial hub in China, and the 9-day shutdown will interrupt businesses around the world, including the likes of Tesla and Disney. A spike in COVID cases across China this month has further disrupted already struggling global supply chains. One expert warned this could be just the tip of the iceberg. The Spanish government has allocated 16 billion euros to help protect households and businesses from the rising cost of living. Inflation is hovering at just under 8% in Spain, spurred in large part by soaring energy costs. Leo McGuinn has more.
A new plan to combat the sharp rise of energy costs. On Monday, the Spanish government announced a package of around 16 billion euros in direct aid and state-backed loans to help companies and households.
What I am asking all political, institutional, and social parties to do is to unite in support of this shock plan in response to the economic and social impact of the war. I ask that we share this time the sense of the best patriotism.
The response comes as prices of petrol continue to soar as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues. The government aimed to reduce the price of petrol and diesel by 20 cents per litre. The state will contribute 15 cents per litre and oil companies 5 cents. Sanchez also announced a focus on housing.
En tercer lugar, en materia de vivienda y de forma excepcional,
in the area of housing, in order to avoid high rises that could harm tenant families, rent reviews over the next 3 months will be limited to 2%. And in order to help the most disadvantaged families, the Spanish government will increase the minimum living income allowance by 15% over the next 3 months.
The Spanish government are hoping that these new measures will go some way to quell the current discontent in the country. Last week, they unveiled a €1 billion plan to reduce fuel prices for truck drivers amid an unprecedented strike. The protests have led to supply bottlenecks for consumers and businesses alike.
Let's finish with a look at the day's trading action now. A mixed close for the major European indices saw gains of between about 0.5 and 0.75 percentage point in each Paris and Frankfurt. Slight losses in London as Rolls-Royce shares tumbled 11%. After 2 straight weeks of gains, Wall Street is also trending lower. The Dow Jones down about 0.75% this hour. Energy stocks following oil prices to trend lower. Francois, the March jobs report will be released at the end of this week. Analysts are expecting the U.S. unemployment rate to tip a little bit further below 4%, around 3.8 are the current expectations.
Full employment.
Full employment. Then the question of wages and all that kind of thing is a different story.
Of course. Many thanks for that. Kate Moody, who will be back with more business news. It's time now for sports. And we say hello to Selena Sykes.
Hi, François.
who, like me, remembers 1986 when France was in the same group as Canada at the Mexico World Cup.
And I think if I remember correctly, Canada finished at the bottom of their group, but they've now booked their place at Qatar 2022. It's only the second time in their history they've qualified for the Men's World Cup. They beat Jamaica 4-0 to ensure a finish in one of the top 3 places in the final stage of the CONCACAF qualifiers. Kyle Larin opened the scoring 13 minutes in, making him the qualifying group's top scorer with 6 goals. Canada's lead was then doubled by Tajon Buchanan just before half-time. Junior Hoylett made it 3-0 late on before an own goal made it 4 just before the final whistle, which prompted an eruption of joyous celebrations in the BMO Field Stadium in Toronto. Canada are top of the qualifying table with 28 points. And they'll almost certainly be joined by their neighbours, the United States, who thrashed Panama 5-1 to all but guarantee their qualification for Qatar 2022. Chelsea's player Christian Pulisic converted 2 penalties in the 17th minute and just before the break, which were both given against Panama's captain Anibal Godi. USA then stormed ahead 4-0 in the first half. The other goals came from Paul Arriola, who headed on target after he was being picked out by a dipping cross from Anthony Robinson, which was then followed by a tap-in by Jesus Ferreira. Pulisic then completed his hat-trick in the 65th minute to make it 5-0. Panama did manage to pull back one consolation goal shortly before the referee blew the final whistle. The US are currently in second in the table with 22 points. A win would mean that win means they only need to avoid a heavy defeat in their final game against Costa Rica on Wednesday to ensure qualification.
Scored 5 goals in the game. I think we could have had more. We're a little bit more clinical at times, but we made a big step towards our goal of qualifying for the World Cup. We know we're not there yet. We know we still have a game to go, and it's a difficult game in Costa Rica.
And the USA are followed by Mexico in the 3rd spot on the same amount of points. They'll be hoping to secure their qualification as they host El Salvador on Wednesday. Meanwhile, anticipation is building in Africa ahead of the continent's second leg of playoff matches for the World Cup qualification on Tuesday. 10 nations went head-to-head in a first leg a few days ago. The team who scores the most goals in both legs will secure qualification for Qatar 2022. It's still very much all to play for Nigeria as they face Ghana. The pair's first leg meeting finished in a goalless draw. Liverpool star Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah will once again be pitted against each other in a repeat of the 2022 Africa Cup of Nations final. The pressure is on the AFCON champion Senegal after Egypt beat them 1-0 in their first leg in Cairo. Algeria are hoping to secure qualification against Cameroon after taking a 1-0 advantage in the pair's opening game. Morocco carry a precious away goal advantage into their second leg against DR Congo, as do Tunisia as they host Mali. And 2 of the remaining 4 spots at the World Cup for European teams will also be secured on Tuesday. After their shock last-minute winner against European champions Italy, North Macedonia are just 1 win away from reaching their first ever World Cup in their history. They'll have to slay another giant to make the fairy tale a reality as they face 2016 Euro winners Portugal. Captain Cristiano Ronaldo said he's sure of victory in front of a home crowd in Porto. Meanwhile, Robert Lewandowski will go up against Zlatan Ibrahimovic as Poland host Sweden. And finally, some good news in the world of cycling as Egan Bernal is back riding his bike after just 2 months after suffering a nearly fatal accident. The Colombian hit a stationary bus at high speed while riding in January. The 25-year-old Colombian underwent 2 spinal surgeries and said he nearly died from his injuries. He posted a photo back in the saddle saying it was the happiest day of his life. Bernal is the reigning Giro d'Italia champion and became the first Colombian to win the Tour de France in 2019. Some really good news there, Francois, and really incredible just 2 months after this really devastating accident for
Great to see him back on the bike. Many thanks for that, Selena Sykes, who will be back with more sports news later. Coming up at the top of the hour, more news, and then it's the France 24 debate. Did Joe go rogue, or was U.S. President Joe Biden on message when he called Vladimir Putin a butcher at the tail end of his tour of Europe in Poland. Your thoughts on the hashtag F24Debate.
Africa News, your eyes on Africa. Bringing you the latest from across the continent.
Eye on Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24 and France24.com. France 24, your window on the world. Liberté, égalité, actualité. It was not until 2004 that Romania's full role in the Holocaust was revealed, second in significance only to Nazi Germany itself. The city of Iași experienced one of the deadliest pogroms of the Second World War, with the number of victims in the hundreds of thousands. Today, the Jewish community is just 3,000 people, and Romanian historians are fighting to instill a duty of remembrance.
25%, 30% seulement de la population de la Roumanie connaît d'une manière correcte l'histoire de la Shoah.
The Shoah remains a largely taboo subject in Romania, and the fear of seeing the mistakes of the past repeated is growing.
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
I'm Sarah Morris, France 24 correspondent in Madrid. I cover Spain and Portugal, two countries recovering from painful recessions, but now being challenged by the political and social fallout from those years. Watch me on Live from Paris and France 24 news programmes.
Sarah Morris, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Welcome back. You're watching France 24. Coming up, Ukraine on the counteroffensive. The mayor of Irpin claims the liberation of that strategic suburb of the capital. Elsewhere, the U.S. confirms the retaking of the northeast town of Trotsianets. The newspaper of last year's Nobel Peace Prize winner suspends publication. Novaya Gazeta, the latest casualty of tightening Russian war censorship. China launches a two-stage lockdown of Shanghai. This as COVID cases surge, courtesy of the Omicron variant in the country's largest city. After the news, the France 24 debate, did Joe go rogue or was it carefully crafted when the U.S. president called Vladimir Putin a butcher unfit for power? Beyond the U.S., which since